Well, it may be summer vacation for a lot of y'all at home, but Brawl Stars Esports sleeps for nobody. Welcome to the official Brawl Stars Esports podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Barlow. With me, three of the best co-casters you can possibly find. I've got Ready, Set, Mr. Teddy, and I've got Trav. Fellas, it's been a wonderful start to the year, but obviously we've got an entire second half ahead of us. I'm really excited to get it underway. We've all been following prospective regions very closely, so I'll start with you, Ready. Over in NA, how have you felt about the overall competition of the BSC so far?
Honestly, pretty good. I mean, if we talk BSC, then, pretty good, right? But I think we've gotten a bit of a taste of how the international scene looks in a very important way in the last month. We saw Snapdragon Mobile Masters. We got to see what NA can do on the big stage, right? What happens when NA doesn't, and let's be fair, get lucky and not have to face both of the East Asia teams like they did in the World Finals last year. And kind of freaking crushed it and made it to the semifinals once again. Tribe Gaming making it all the way to the grand finals too. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how NA stacks up on the big stage, but also if we talk what the other regions are saying about NA, I've heard like some mutterings about what does East Asia say about NA, the team that is at the forefront of Brawl Stars Esports following last year's World Finals. They studied the NA draft a lot, which is, I think, a really interesting talking point.
Yeah, it really is. I feel like one thing from Masters especially and seeing an international tournament go down is just how different all these strategies are. One thing for me last year especially was kind of seeing all of these brawlers that each respective region kind of brings into the table, and then everybody comes home with different stuff. I recognized last year that like Max, for example, Lou, for example, from NA went across the world while we brought home somebody like Max. So I think it's kind of interesting to see that too. I definitely going into that tournament, speaking of, DreamHack, was I really thought there were two teams in my mind that kind of led the way. I'll call them contenders. In the past for Worlds, I've seen it as Zeta 0 and Zeta 1 last year as being the kind of two teams in my mind that I thought, hey, those teams had the best chance of winning. And coming out of that, I think I have four teams and maybe even five, one of those teams not showing up at DreamHack the last go around that could possibly make it. Tribe and S-Team in from NA being that example. But Teddy, I mean, Reply Totem really surprised me. It was a team that we've seen be at the top of their game before. They have dominated at LANs, but this BSC season didn't necessarily go their way. So I know that was something that caught me off guard. Is it something that caught you guys off guard too?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey for EMEA so far, and I agree, Masters was insane. It was kind of like the first LAN international event where it felt like, other teams than East Asia stood a chance, and more than that, well, obviously Reply Totem even ended up winning it, which was quite unexpected, and I think a lot of regions, as Reddy said as well, looked really strong. NA was a region we heard a lot, especially on the first day, just a lot of support, I think, towards NA. But coming back to EMEA, man, it's been quite an interesting start of the season. I mean, if we look at, obviously Zeta, they've been really dominant, kind of a wild journey on their end as well, Last year, they were kind of the team that never won anything, was always good, but never quite good enough. This year, they just, crossed the T's and dotted the I's, and they're looking really, really strong. Reply Totem as well in a good place, but as you said, kind of still slacking in BSC. Not quite there just yet, but still, one of the top contenders in any event. And for the third place, Na'Vi right now. I mean, Na'Vi, dude. They have had quite a miserable start of the year, to be honest. They looked quite inconsistent, and then suddenly they just win a monthly final and dominate across the region. So, dude, this is announcing just such an interesting way to finish the season.
Yeah, I think EMEA is a pretty wild region in general. It feels like we always have this debate on Twitter, right? I feel like all the NA people beef with the EMEA people, and we're like, which one's the most competitive? But there's no doubt that EMEA, being as large as it is, has the most depth. You cast the monthly qualifiers all the time. I try and tune in when we can because of the time changes, but a lot of the times it is wild how close those best 2 of 3s are. I mean, so many great teams. Wouldn't surprise me at the end of this year that we had even more grand finals champions. We had Zeta do 2 in a row, and then Na'Vi show out of nowhere, like you said, and do what they did. But there's upsets everywhere in EMEA. And of course, Trav, you cast it all the time too. I'm sure you can comment as well. But I feel like EMEA is always one of the most entertaining monthly finals to watch. All of the ones this year, I feel like, have been pretty competitive overall. I feel like it's been my favorite year of Brawl Stars esports so far, at least, whether it's casting, whether it's watching as a fan. I think overall it's just been insane to watch. But no doubt, Trav, EMEA is just so competitive.
Yeah, I mean, it's the only region we get to see from that top 8, and even the top 8 is as entertaining as it is. It wouldn't be the same across other regions. I just feel like that's the exact way it is. We've got so many teams in Europe who can come out on top, and we saw Navi do it in the last monthly final, and I say that, but Zeta did win the past 2 as well. But all the games have been so close. It seems like Zeta have been running away with it in multiple of these Snapdragon Pro Series Cups as well. So I'm intrigued to see if they're going to be able to grab their thunder back and take this next one as well. But at the end of the day, Europe is pretty much always going to be the region with the most teams who are at the top level and who can compete at that level. But at the end of the day, I just feel like we've got so many teams, and Totem doing so well at DreamHack Masters as well, that they're going to be able to compete in this second half. Still got Zeta, still got Navi doing so well. We've even seen Foot do some changes, and they're seeming to be performing better as well. A&R, all these teams just have so much depth, and it's scary to look at.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think about things like LCQ, and only 7 of those teams are going to get to make it. Like, some really good teams from EMEA are possibly getting cut from that list, which is crazy. Fighting for those top 3 spots for Worlds is going to be brutal. Right now, it's Navi, Reply, Totem, and Zeta, I believe. But, that's wild to think about, that even a team that won the entire international tournament has not won a single EMEA Grand Finals in BSC. That really does blow my mind. Even last month, we had some teams really step it up. SK, who we also got to see at a bigger stage at the international level, of course, at DreamHack Masters. So it's interesting to kind of see how they're doing. Just, I think in ESL last year, a somewhat different roster, of course, to get them there. And now I thought they held their own. I thought they did okay. The results they had didn't get them to day 2. They weren't top 4, but I think they made EMEA proud and at least showed what they could do a little bit. I thought the other regions were really interesting as well, though. We got to see some of these sub-regions kind of have a little more of an appearance. I thought that was really cool. One of the unfortunate side effects of esports is sometimes visa issues happen. It's a really, kind of awful thing that is a lot of times out of players' control, out of organizations' control, and it is what it is. But I thought it was really cool to see regions like India, kind of get representation there. We got a little bit from all over the world. How'd you guys feel about their showing? I don't think personally I really expected them to win it. I kind of expected them to be the first one out, but I think those are good little, stepping stones to getting your region to be more competitive. They're starting to get that international experience. They're starting to play bigger teams as well across the world, and I think Ready that really helps them out.
Yeah, I mean, you got to jump in a swim, right? And you see India kind of diving into this head first, and being a region that has a massive amount of support. And I also want to remark that it makes me very happy that we finally got to see the full Indian teams at LAN, even if they were only able to get through literally the day before the event started. Like visa issues are very complicated. It's out of a lot of people's control. But we got everyone up on stage, and it was fantastic. Thing is that, yes, being a newer region in the scene as well, also kind of coming from a region where, and I think people don't really like to approach this topic, but it's incredibly important to discuss, and it's very, very important in competitive, is when you're competing online, there are servers, okay? And if you're closer to the server, then you have an advantage. And the servers in that SEA region are very biased towards the people playing in, say, Singapore. And so you have this India region that is not really able to compete on the same level because they are at a massive disadvantage. Now that things have been leveled with things being normalized with a new format, I think I, as a spectator and an enjoyer of this sport, I'm incredibly grateful for it. I know the players also are very, very grateful that there are dedicated servers or it is normalized which server you play on for specific sub-regions. And in India, I think that's the first step towards really elevating this incredibly passionate scene, one that has a lot of support behind it, but it's still one of the, as a scene, newer kids on the block. We've seen the same thing happen before with, say, with mainland China, right? Newer to the game, haven't had as much experience with the game, at least in a high-level competitive setting. And what happens when they show up to Worlds? It's kind of what we expect. And it's a little disappointing to see that, yeah, they haven't had as much time. There's kind of an unfair advantage, but I'm glad that we get to see everyone show up and really give it their all. And I really hope we get to see kind of India catch up to the rest of the world too.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I feel like any time that I cast APAC, which of course has SEA, it has India, it has East Asia, I feel like especially for those first two subregions, they're very passionate. I think that was a good word that you used. It's always something that when I look at the chat afterwards or see people online, they have a lot of fans. They're very passionate about it, and I really enjoy that. It's something that makes Brawl Esports special for me, and I'm sure for you guys as well. But just being able to bring light to great players across the world, it's something that is really special about this. I think it's awesome to kind of see them grow and develop, and this is kind of their early stages, if you will, of getting that international experience. We're fortunate that Brady and I are from NA, you guys are from EMEA. We've been at this for a while. We've got teams at the top of competitions pretty much every single year that we're going to have this, just because we've been around a long time. We're big regions, but nonetheless, India, SEA, great teams that have been representing themselves, and I'm really glad they got to make it too, even if it wasn't winning the thing. I think they met expectations. I think they showed up, and especially considering the circumstances, like you said, a lot of these teams are scrimming multiple days in advance, and that was something that they didn't necessarily have the luxury of. So I think that overall that I was impressed with them. It's something I'm excited for, if they get another season and things like ESL, or we have another Masters, or they earn through those LCQ spots, I'll be super excited from my heart. I will definitely be cheering them on the inside a little bit too. But one region that I've also thought is really interesting, speaking of APAC, has been East Asia this year, and specifically a team I kind of want to hone in on a little bit is Crazy Raccoon. I think for me it was a team that going into Masters I had being the favorites. I know the majority of the world did. I know the majority of predictions did. But it's been really interesting. They're 2 of 3 in BSC. They don't quite make the grand finals in Masters. I think coming into this year, we've got multiple time world champions. We've got really talented player. This was kind of the super team. And I'm not sure how I feel. I don't think they're necessarily as a standalone team as I thought they were before this. I think they were kind of shown that there are other really good teams contending for them. Obviously, their ceiling might be arguably the highest in the BSC. But Trav, how are we feeling about Crazy Raccoon for this second half?
I will say, as far as BSC goes, they've seemed to kind of rise up again towards the end. They had a couple of monthly finals that they did manage to take over Reject, who are their biggest competition. But we're looking at them in DreamHack Masters. They're definitely beatable. And that's the thing. Now, people know they're beatable, and that also kind of brings them down yet another peg, because not only have they been beaten, but people realize across the world coming into World Finals, they're not going to be as scared as them. And that's such a big thing in Brawl Esports, sports, and esports in general. Knowing a team's beatable, you don't have that fear factor going into it. It's definitely going to be a little bit more worrying for Crazy Raccoon, I feel, towards the later portion of the year, international tournaments, and even monthly finals too, that they are just that beatable team. And, Reply Totem have done it. We've seen them, SK came close. STMN even beat them as well. But, they're just not as scary. And I think that's such a huge thing going into the second portion of the year that, Reject can take advantage of it. International teams later on can. And I just don't think they're going to be performing as well.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting that you bring up the mind games with that. And I think, in all my time watching Brawl Stars esports, last year we had the rivalry between Zeta 0 and Zeta 1, a real back and forth. And again, those were kind of the two teams I expected to be winning worlds. There are other teams that I thought, hey, they have a chance to make some upsets. They're professionals at the end of the day. I say it all the time on broadcast. These guys are so darn good at what they do. All it takes is one really good day of performances or one really bad day of performances, and it can really change Brawl Stars history. But Crazy Raccoon, it was the first time I think I'd ever really seen after losing Tensai have just this emotional, normally they're pretty straight faced. They keep their composure. I call it the Federer face, if you will, if you're a tennis fan out there. They just don't show their emotions too often until the thing's said and done. But I think that was the first time I'd really seen them distraught. It's not too often that in this game, 2-time world champion Tensai has really had to face adversity. All these internationals, he won 2021 World Finals. He won 2022 World Finals. He didn't go to MSI, so excluding that one. But I think this is the first real big thing where they face some serious adversity. So in this second half, I think I'm going to be really interested to see how they kind of grow and adapt from that. I think they've got some pretty good competition too. Definitely opportunity to kind of boost the confidence levels back up. Like you mentioned, Reject with the Choppy leading the way on that team. Very, very solid. I think he's in a legacy year, which is kind of an interesting story as well. He's won multiple world finals, kind of going off on his own, doing his own thing. A few on esports even have challenged them a little bit. It's got Dempsey, Milcreo, Suzuku. I think overall, this is kind of an awesome region to watch. And not to mention, we haven't really gotten to see the full potential of somebody like Chasma Gaming EA that I think a lot of people, including myself, had high expectations for this year. And they haven't quite delivered on that. They've played Reject 3 for 3 now, haven't quite made it by. But I think overall, Teddy, it's just the first time that I think I guess it gave them hope. And I think that's what Trav was almost alluding to, was the world has some hope that East Asia might not take this thing.
Well, I mean, we come from 2 years where, we'd say only Zeta can beat Zeta. Because in the international events, even monthly finals, that's the only thing that really happened. Now, there's been some roster changes and everything, but if anything, I feel like Crazy Raccoon kind of came out on top, and really has just a all-got talent of the region. But even then, I don't know. I kind of agree with what you guys said before. It kind of felt like they just weren't quite in the zone as much as they were before. And I feel like especially East Asia has been known as that region that is so incredibly consistent because they're able to always stay focused, not let emotions get in the way, not get distracted. And you could kind of tell from player camps and from the way they were playing that it just wasn't quite like maybe just a bad day, but it was the first bad day that we as an audience got to see. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily worrying for them, but as you said, it's a huge spark of hope for sure for everyone at home because, yeah, the fear factor is not going to be as present anymore. I still think that they are probably the number one team in the world overall, because it's been 2 years, let's not forget it, where they've been really, really dominant. But there's a lot of hope coming up for every region and every team that's, hoping to finally get a win against them in the BSC.
Something I will say, just in the scope of this is like East Asia versus the world, is I think it goes further back than just what we saw at Masters. If we roll back the clock to, say, MSI, we didn't see Zeta go undefeated. And I'm an NA guy. I'm going to remember every single game, every single set that Stamina or Tribe takes off of a team from a different region, but particularly East Asia. And just in the discussions with the Stamina guys following MSI last year, they said they went in with no preparation for their match against Zeta. They were fully focused on their first matchup of the day. They face Zeta. They take a set. They very, very, very nearly take a second set that would have pushed them to set 5. So I think that moment right there for Stamina, and I'm also good friends with the guy who was their coach at the time, Sword. And Sword said for him and also for the team as a whole, that was a huge revelation. That was a huge realization that, wait, they are actually beatable. It is actually very realistic that this team is beatable. And also at Masters, I had the pleasure of speaking a bunch with Wiggly Spoo, who is up there casting and is very well acquainted with the Asian, mega region. And so Spoo tells me a couple of things. First of all, that the East Asian region really does look at NA and look at their drafting and put them under a microscope and wait for the last pick. Here comes the last pick. They're like, oh my god, they're like Patchy's such a genius. Bobby, they're on something else. And then they proceed to pick none of those brawlers because that's just not how the meta in the region works. It's all about team play. It's not about your lane matchups in Asia, or so I'm told. That's why the long poker, that's why Byron can be such a popular pick. But this region has been proven to be beatable, and for Stamina in particular, that has resided in their minds for the past year. They come back with this renewed resolve, and they are able to take down East Asia. But another thing that I heard from Spoo is he said, speaking to Tensai, and of course, they are incredibly humble. All of the East Asian players are very, very humble and down to earth. And what he told me Tensai said is dude, we got lucky. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow because the way that I, as a professional opinion haver, I, as a commentator, have framed things is that, yeah, they're on top. Yeah, they're the best and they play the best and that's why they're on top. But ask them themselves and they seem to think that they got lucky. Something to chew on because there's no real answer and I can't get inside his head and tell you exactly why he feels that way. But when the best players in the world, at least according to us and according to the standings from World last year, tell you that they got lucky and then they proceed to not take first place, then you got to wonder,
I mean, I think that's fair. I think that's honestly very true. Like I said, it does really feel like they are just these humble bunch of dudes that are absolute grinders of the game. They've been on top for a long time. And I think that definitely messes with you a little bit too, right? The expectation for somebody like, Zeta Division 1 and 0 at the time, and now Crazy Raccoon, we hold them to a higher standard than anybody on the planet. It just is what it is, right? When you win the grand finals of the world 2 times, we're going to hold you to a higher standard. That's where we start bringing in who's the GOAT questions. And even somebody like Satampo, Tensai, 2 players that a lot of people regard to be that, are on that team. So when we don't see them win an international tournament for the first time, it shakes up the world a little bit. And I think a stance I had before, and yeah, I picked Crazy Raccoon to win. I think a lot of people did. I don't think that was super surprising. For me, it was like, I think this is the safest pick, but this is the first time I've gone into an international tournament, and now coming away with it, I'm even more cloudy in terms of what I believe going towards things like Worlds. Obviously, we have months ahead of us, and this is the kind of the way too early predictions that I like to nerd out about, but this is the first year where I've had question marks. This is the first year where, I've seen the stamina match from MSI and World Finals. I've seen what Tribe can do against, Zeta Zero and Zeta Ones of the time. We've seen SK even last year push them to the brink. They were a second place team in Worlds, and it blows my mind how much closer the gap has gotten. Because like you said, in 2021, if you were watching back then, awesome World Finals, you can always check out the VOD if you want, but when we watch scrims and things like that, Zeta was the best team. It was unquestionable. Every pro was saying it. Nobody believed, I think, truly that it wasn't going to be Zeta at that time. And then we get into the next year, and now there's 2 of them. What are we supposed to do? What on earth? Now we have to fight 2-headed dragon. And now this year they've, all gone their separate ways. They're all doing their thing. But for Crazy Raccoon, I think this is, like you're saying, this is the first time we had all of that history back there. And this is the first time that we can finally see somebody else possibly win it. It could be any region, honestly, at this point. We saw Totem win that one. We had Tribe and STM the strong showing. I'm never going to rule out Crazy Raccoon. That's just not something in my vocabulary. There's no way that I would ever discount them just because of one international loss. But it was really interesting to me, too. One thing I picked up on from the interviews what you guys had when you guys were over there in Japan was Bobby was strangely more confident, I would say, going against Crazy Raccoon, which is something like he even admitted. He said, it sounds a little weird, but we were more scared of SK than we were STMN. I don't know if that's a playing style thing, if that's a draft thing, but for me, it's probably because he's been stewing on that for a long time. Anytime I talk to these S-Team guys, and I'm sure it's very similar across other teams in the world, revenge was definitely on their mind. And, they have no problem with them as individuals, but they wanted to win that so badly. I know they put in a ton of prep. I know all these teams are getting closer and closer. I think people just want it that much more after seeing the years go down like that. And now I think there are so many teams across the world that are going to be doing something similar. I think overall, it's insane to see. I think this is by far the most competitive year of Brawl. 2023 has been my favorite. I've said it a few times, but even coming into this year, it really felt like this one was going to be competitive, like it is for EMEA, like it is for all these other regions. And we haven't even touched on LATAM South, which I also think has some incredible teams as well. I think LATAM has so many good teams. We have Clash, we have Zest. That's been an interesting storyline. Teddy and Trav, you guys have casted several times now. SA West. Wild stuff. Last month it was literally like reverse sweep after reverse sweep, upset after upset. It's just maybe the most entertaining. I think it's very slept on. I think more people need to watch it. I mean, you all can definitely touch on it as well, but those teams didn't even make an appearance at the international. I think those teams have a lot of legs to make the distance too.
I mean, yeah. I don't know if you want me or Teddy to touch it. We're kind of just sitting
there
looking at each
other.
The podcast.
Yeah, I kind of just jump in. No worries.
Online podcast memento right there. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, I kind of feel like, last time I feel like the competition isn't as good as it has been in previous years. With the sub-regions, I enjoy watching it. I enjoy commentating it. Don't get me wrong, but it kind of feels like it's a very one-sided thing. And I know the World Final spots and LCQ spots do reflect that quite heavily. Only one side's got that World spot, the other side's got LCQ spot. But at the end of the day, I kind of liked it when these teams had more of a competition. And you said with regions and stuff, I'm sure it's the same as it is with SEA and India being split up. But at the end of the day, if you're putting these good teams against the teams who are on the rise, it's going to make the teams on the rise get better. But if you put in the teams who are on the rise against other teams who are on the rise and they win month in, month out, it kind of seems to me like they're not going to be getting any better. And when and if they manage to get through that LCQ, or when they face other teams at the LCQ, they're going to feel confident because they've won 6 out of 6 monthly finals or 5 out of 6, whatever it'll be. they're going to be coming in so confident, and they haven't even faced another good LATAM team this year, never mind an extremely good Worlds team like we see Reject or a team like that trickling through into the LCQ. It kind of feels like they need a bit more competition in one of these regions, at least in my eyes. I don't know how Teddy feels.
No, I'm completely with you. I think it's even more than just like building up that confidence. I think in a sense they're going to come unprepared, right? Because they were not at Masters, so they couldn't really, compare their level to other regions. And yeah, since the regions have been split, I do feel like, if there is one region that has suffered the most from, the region split, I think it is South America, just because, yeah, there are very dominant teams on each side so far. And if you remove that competition factor, you're not going to be as sharp, as prepared, because competition is what's going to, raise the standard in your region. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that I feel like right now on both sides of South America, it's been a bit too one-sided to my taste. There's still the other half of the year to maybe see other teams on the rise, but so far it's been a pretty set story, and it's looking like, in SA East, Zest have been really strong. Clash a little bit disappointing in the first half of the year so far, which I was honestly kind of expecting to maybe even be better than Zest this year, and it really hasn't looked like that so far.
Yeah, I believe it was the very first month, and obviously going into 2023, it's always going to be a very different year than 2022. I think Zeta Division, like you mentioned earlier, from EMEA is a great example of that. We get a bunch of these players that maybe last year had some good success, and then they take a step up the following year. We see that happen all the time. I think for a lot of you all, I think even on the desk too, I think you guys were 3 for 3 with Arc as well, of picking Clash the first month to win. And at home, I'd pick Zest, and I think it just goes to show that, anything can happen. Zest, I do believe as well, have kind of been above and beyond, obviously going 3 for 3. Clash got a little bit closer that final month, but nobody has been quite able to take down Zest. And I think that's interesting that you guys bring that up. I think in terms of entertainment levels, arguably been one of the best regions. But of course, when you split up that region too, I totally see that perspective. I can see where you guys are coming from, of maybe they're not getting as good of, maybe for us, it is more fun to watch. It's more entertaining. But it's not necessarily building them up to be that international powerhouse, maybe like some of these other regions are. I'll ask you all a hypothetical question too. Zest, in my opinion, probably the best team out of both of these regions. If they were at ESL Masters, what do you think their ceiling would have been, Trev?
That's actually a very good question. It's leaving me a little bit baffled there, but yeah, it is a tough one. I think it's undoubtable that have come up above the Indian teams. I spoke to the Indian teams and I said, I'm sorry if I'm being too critical. They were like, no, we accept it. We know we're probably coming into this one the weakest two teams. So I think they'll have come above those. Maybe, depending on how they performed, at least Zest could have slotted above me, helped me in SK, maybe top 5. But also at the same time, they could have just been destroyed by those. We just don't know what level they are. So they're either above SK and Help Me, or kind of just below them, at least in my eyes.
Reddy, I saw you nodding too. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll give my opinion too. If we talk objectively here, and I'm not going to offend any of the Indian players or Indian fans saying this, yeah, I think they probably would have beaten the Indian teams. And I actually didn't expect Trev to say help me, and I was hoping he would. So awesome, because I agree there. I think that they could have taken down help me. I think that, like, we've seen how this region looks on the big stage, on the international stage. You see CMGBR take it was Zeta 0 all the way to double match point. What is happening? That was one game away from an absolute catastrophe for our entire paradigms of how we understand Brawl Stars esports, a region that historically we've seen as a bit weaker on the world stage, and probably because, hey, we're all casting in English. We're not speaking the language that this region primarily uses to communicate. We don't get to hear from the players as much. But is actually a remarkably strong region and looks very fearsome in an international environment. So I'm there with you. Like, at minimum, taking down Help Me, and then probably still looking pretty fearsome against a team like SK as well.
I just want to add as well, though, considering SK weren't their new reformed roster, adding Jet, and I think that's a big add that they've had. I do want to say maybe it'd be like, I would say possibly there could be SK. You slide Jen in there. I'm thinking probably not. I think SK would still come on top with this kind of new reformed roster because they do seem to be performing a bit better. They made the monthly final with him and stuff like that. So I think that was a big roster change as well, bringing him in. And I think that could put them just above those LATAM teams.
Yeah, true. And then, of course, like, how do you compare making a monthly final in EMEA versus routinely winning a monthly final in LATAM, just as a nebulous region? And so that's why the international competitions are so interesting, is because it allows us to put everyone like on a level playing field in a LAN environment and see how they do on the zero ping. Are they gliding around? Are they doing this? So I'm just saying, I wouldn't mind having like 3 majors a year. That would be pretty cool because it would give us like a better litmus test several times throughout the year to check on how everyone is keeping up with each other. But I think really the takeaway, if we're just talking Masters, is that NA is looking scary. Like, following Worlds, there's a convenient way to, and I've already touched on this, a convenient way to toss out the NA comeuppance, which is that, well, they weren't on the same side as Zeta at any stage of the bracket until the semifinals, and had to take down like some EU teams along the way. But some of the stronger competitors headed in were knocked out by Zeta fairly early on. I'm talking Reply Totem especially. So that's a very important thing to address. Come Masters, a double elim format, we still see NA come in the top 2. Now, this is also a bit of a different one, though, because this has been a year-long tournament, and we've seen Reply Totem and SK basically farm a lot of points from going to those season finals. And I think also this leads into like a larger discussion, if anyone has opinions about these awarding points for qualifying for the Brawl Stars World Finals, considering that you're able to start earning these points well, like halfway into last year's season. And it depends on how you look at it. I do kind of want to get people's opinions on this, though, because I feel like one of the big things with BSC is it's its own competition, and we compartmentalize it from one year to the next. And then here comes ESL, and there's a huge carryover from your performance in the last season to this current season. And I'm sure some people have opinions on that.
I was going to say, Teddy, let's hear from you, because I think, obviously EMEA a little closer for you guys. It's something you guys are casting more closely as well. I kind of go back and forth on it. I can kind of see the perspective both ways, but I think you make a fair point that it is just really interesting that ESL, for example, we touched on it, but the SK roster that made it to this Masters is a little bit different than the one that we currently have in BSC. I think Jedin was a good example of that, and maybe that's going to be their Reply Totem 2022, adding Joker in the fold kind of surgeons. But Teddy, give us your thoughts on that.
Well, actually, I disagree just a little bit with the way Reddy stated this, because I don't necessarily feel like the season is that much longer than for BSC. I think it's just like deferred, right? Because the big Masters, like, World Finals equivalent is in May, or like was in May. So I feel like maybe it was a little bit longer, but I also I think that if you look at the year in a Snapdragon Pro Series year, it was pretty much a year, but I mean, I think that what's quite interesting, to be fair, is like for teams like SK, I don't think that if they had to qualify, in March or April for Masters, I don't think they would have qualified. And I think that's not really a surprise to anyone, because they started the year quite poorly. But I guess the system was very much in their favor in this specific situation, because I genuinely don't think they would have made it there otherwise. And I'm sure that they're very happy that this time around they got to do the event.
In the 2023 BSC year, it also drags over there as well. So a lot of points essentially being decided in ESL for BSC as well. And I think that's where, there is a little confusion with that. I think for people at home, that's something that's gonna help out too. But no, you're good. I mean, it's good but yes, I think in short, Masters points It's all over. Like the first two seasons, we're now going into season 3. I know the Open Cups for Europe have been going on recently. For NA, they've been going on. That's a completely different, kind of year. If you want to think of it kind of like they said, where it's, I think Teddy brought up a good point where it is kind of awkward in the sense that, we have teams that from 2022 are playing in a 2023 BSC year, but it's hard because I go back and forth, right? Because it's two different leagues. We have different rosters. In NA, we have different rosters too. For example, West Coast here, different roster than it is in the BSC. It's just because that they stuck together then. They were playing with each other in 2022. They want to keep those points, so Alex stays with them, for example. But there's also in the sense for me that like championships are won at LAN, right? And for Europe, we have 6 online competitions, which are super important, but especially as, volatile as a region as it is, I don't know if it's the worst thing in the world to have all those teams online qualify and then see if they're up for the challenge at a LAN setting. I think especially for those teams that maybe have less of that international experience. We don't really have question marks about somebody like Replied Totem, and even SK in the past historically have done quite well at LAN settings, but Navi, another team that's done really well. But I think there are a lot of teams out there that maybe this could be a good opportunity to battle test them, and I think that might be a little bit of a controversial opinion, but again, like we play BSC championships in LAN, and the ultimate test for these people are going to be things like LCQ and Masters and what have you, all these Challenge Cup LAN finals. I'm not sure it's the worst thing in the world, Teddy, to have that be contributing towards BSC points.
I think it's actually quite huge for some of the teams that had a slow start to the year. Looking at teams like SK, or even Team Queso, Fruit Esports, that barely right now would be in a qualifying spot for LCQ. So I think for a lot of teams like that, and even teams well below them, this is a huge opportunity to actually catch up. I believe, and try to have an actual hyper competitive end of the year in a region that so far has been full of surprises. I think that was kind of the story for the first month or two of the year, where loads of top teams, top orgs that invest heavily in the Brawl esports scene were just not getting the results you would expect from those sort of investments. And this is a little bit of an extra safety net where, okay, instead of what we had last year, which was double points for the second half, there is no double points, I believe, but an opportunity still to cash in some extra points and get a little bit of extra security leaning towards World.
I think at the same time, though, I'm not sure if I do like how it contributes, because I like them as separate competitions. I feel like they should be two separate entities. The Snapdragon Pro Series giving points for the Snapdragon Pro Series Masters, BSC giving points for BSC, the Brawl Stars Championship. I feel like that's how it should be. And although I kind of do agree with the point that Teddy made of allowing these teams to catch up, it's also the same as. I just don't know if that's the case. They should be catching up through the BSC, through that competition, not be giving a lifeline in another competition because they didn't start well. I just don't feel like that's how it should be. And also, if you start doing well now in ESL, and you start doing well in BSC, you finish Worlds, and then if it's the same again and we have a Masters through next year, it kind of makes you want to keep the roster the same. And that's another thing I don't like about these seasons not lining up. If you've done well from ESL and you've qualified to Worlds, and then you're like, okay, I want to try something with a different team, you lose all of the points you've had, and you're not going to be going to the Masters event. Just like we've seen Semantic there, they finish up the SPS season in December, and then he's not going to Masters, even though he's come second in 2 events to be able to get the points. And I'd like it if the seasons maybe lined up a little bit better. Then I wouldn't mind it giving points and stuff like that, but I also don't know at the same time that I really like it that much.
I will say, I will raise a very important point, and it kind of goes off of a couple of things that you said, Trev, where I think they should be their own competitions. And this is an important thing to realize, is that they are their own competitions in more than just how the seasons line up. And this plays directly into those rosters not lining up. Perfect example of if these things are going to work in tandem, they need to work basically exactly the same in some very important facets of the rulebook. Here's the example I'm going to give, and it's kind of an egregious one. Killer, incredibly skilled player playing for Motomamis. Now, Killer cannot compete in the Snapdragon Pro Series. Why? Because he's from Guatemala. That's basically it. He's not allowed to compete because of the country he's from, but he's allowed to compete in BSC. So he can't compete to get the points from Snapdragon that qualify towards BSC, but he's allowed to play in BSC. It's a massive disadvantage and definitely calls for a more scrutinizing look at the rules in normalizing things so that a player is literally allowed to compete.
I mean, I think, although I kind of agree with your point, I don't think that North America are doing the BSC points yet. I mean, one of you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's just Europe that are doing that at the moment. And I kind of, although it was kind of maybe you were a little bit incorrect there, I do feel like that raises a good point, and that if we're going to do it for one, you're going to do it for all.
Yeah, I mean, you're even if it's not legitimately happening, by doing it once, you are setting a precedent. Mm-hmm. And it can be a dangerous precedent if left unchecked.
Yeah, I still think the point you were making, Reddy, is a fair one too. I think Killer's a great example of that, right? Even if it's not contributing points for the BSC, and Semantic a good example of this too. These guys work hard in the BSC, or Semantic, for example, grinds out multiple seasons, and then BSC season is structured differently. The calendar year for Masters and for World Finals, two very different things. And as a result, there are going to be roster changes in the meantime. Semantic, for example, unfortunately doesn't get to reap the rewards and go to Japan after, being with SK for a long time, qualifying for that. It is tough, right? And I go back and forth too. I think the competitor in me, I don't know how a lot of the players are feeling. I'm sure depending on their point standings, it's probably going to be a little bit different if I'm honest. But I think nonetheless, if you're one of these top teams, and you go to LAN, you prove yourself, and you say, hey, it's not a mistake that I'm at the top here. I'm going to get it done. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's one bad day, but if they keep doing things like double elimination, I think they're going to have all the opportunities to kind of prove themselves. And, I don't know the exact amount of points off the top of my head. If you win, that challenge season, what have you, it may be enough to guarantee you a world final spot or an LCQ spot. Again, I just don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but I go back and forth in the sense that I think, one, as a fan, I would love to see this, but I think it would be cool to have those LAN events for all of the regions too. I know Europe's is, again, changing up all the time. It's so top heavy in the sense that there are 12 teams that can do it every single month, maybe even more. Every time I watch qualifiers, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that team was as good as it was. Like, they're causing upsets in a ruckus in their double elimination format. It's wild. And I think it's a fair point too. I guess in reflecting too, I kind of forgot about double points. You brought that up, and man, I don't know how I don't know how I felt about that at the time. I'm glad that they try new things. I think we're still as great of a game as it is. If you really think about it, what is this, year 5 of Brawl Stars? I mean, it's still pretty young in all grand scheme of things, and I feel like the competitive scene's gotten better and better. People forget too, we're now only in our second season of having the draft, and to start the draft, we had one ban on each side. I mean, it's wild how quickly that we have just elevated Brawl Esports, and I think this is one way of maybe attempting and letting EMEA be the guinea pig for that. I think LCQ is a really cool idea as well, and I don't know. I go back and forth too, because they are two separate competitions. They're two different rosters of players. Again, Semantic, Killer, great examples of that with their respective teams. They work really hard in one, and then, they can't necessarily either play due to where they live and how the regions are split there. It is two different things of competitions, but at the same time, I guess I don't know. I guess I'm selfish in that sense. Like, I want to see the LANs. I want to see these teams go at it a little bit. And I think from watching at home, I think that adding an extra oomph, adding some pressure makes it more fun for us, Teddy. So I don't know. That's kind of, I'm kind of in between. I think all of you all have swayed me various different directions, and I go back and forth.
I'm like cautiously optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that one of the best things about BSC is their willingness to change format year to year. Like, as you said, we used to have one ban per team, blind picks. We used to have single elimination bracket for qualifiers, then Swiss, double elimination, draft, like so many drastic changes, double points last year, which I think as a spectator was a lot of fun, but I think that like for players could be very frustrating as well. And I really love the willingness to just try to innovate, and try to switch things up to keep things fresh, and also see what sticks, see what works, and carry that over to the next year. So that's why, like, I'm quite excited, to be honest, for the points here in the third party event, just because it's something that they haven't done yet, and I want to see how that actually works out. But I also see that there are some concerns for sure, and there are some potential problems. I think Reddy made a super valid point, because we don't necessarily look at it as much in the EMEA, because I feel like most of the best players are from like specific countries that easily carry over between BSC and ESL. But there might be a possibility as well that there's some countries that aren't included in one or the other, and that would lead for some pretty awkward scenarios potentially. Even though I don't think it's that big a problem right now in EMEA or Europe plus MENA, as SPS like to call it. There might be some inconsistencies there, and I feel like if it carries points towards the BSC, they need to iron that out and make sure that it's completely clean and there's no room for misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think in terms of just like the country breakdown, for example, that's something I wouldn't have even thought of. I think that's something that I would hope that they would think about and work out too. Because Killer, again, that's a great example for MENA, for ESL. I don't know if I think they're the exact same lineup. It may not be. There may be some countries in there that don't necessarily align, just like NA is. But yeah, I think Killer, like you said, Reddy, a great example of that, because if if they ever did that for NA, he would be ineligible only because of the country he lives in, which would be super unfortunate. I guess if they put him in something like SA, I guess, but then he's separated from his teammates, and that's weird too. I don't know. I think that's a very fair point, though, and at least having the countries be structured very similarly might be a good step. Again, it's a very circumstantial. Unfortunately, Killer probably one of the only people falling victim to that right now out of those teams that have made challenge seasons in the past and gone on to the regular season. We'll call it for ESL. So I think that's a fair point, too. I kind of have a fun question, a little bit of a pivot here off of our topic, and we can, go around the room. I want to know what your all's favorite team or teams or players, however you guys want to frame it, has been to watch this year. And I'll start with Reddy, because I think I could guess your answer if I had a whiteboard right now. I'd write it down. But what has your favorite team or players been to watch this year?
Okay, I mean, the thing is, you're gonna have trouble getting a straight answer out of me, but
that's okay.
Every single. Actually, no. Teams from both NA East and NA West that I've really, really enjoyed watching. My favorite team right now, I have no allegiances, just so you know. Despite what the background might say, I like the colors. It's cool, and I like free stuff, so I'll put it up on my wall. Send me free stuff, please. But in NA East, I've been pretty blown away by what CMG has been accomplishing lately. They win their first monthly final, but they don't stop there. They continue the dominance they've shown in some of the cups from ESL in that first split of this new season. Some of the most impressive team play, if not the hands down most impressive team play that I've seen in North America in all the years that I've been doing this since 2020. From NA West, though, I think probably my favorite team, and maybe just NA overall, to watch has been the Dog Walkers. Seeing Apache break into the scene a couple of years ago, very hotly anticipated face to show up here, partnering with Chino and especially Charles, who I think has at a lot of avenues, at a lot of turns, been shut down in his competitive endeavors, first being with IX, then there's the IX scandal, then being with Blood Diamond, thanks for the lack of maturity. And now finally getting to have those moments with the Dog Walkers and being a pretty dominant team. That said, STMN has really wrested back their control in that region and has also displayed their dominance on the world stage. So if I'm going into the world finals, if I'm going into an international competition, STMN is my favorite. But as far as favorite teams to watch, it's been Dog Walkers for most of the year. And at this very moment, it is CMG. I think that they are elevating the level of team play in North America, specifically NA East. And I think that pretty much everyone in the NA region should be carefully watching them and taking note. The comms must just be off the charts. Go watch their Brawl Ball set from, they were facing, I forget which team, but it was cup number 5 in this split. It was ridiculous. I'm pretty sure you covered it on your channel, Kenny. I
It
covered
was
it on
dog
mine too.
walkers.
It was dog walkers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
I'm sure
I know
we were
the set
both
you're talking
freaking
about
out.
because I was freaking out.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We use the same words too. Yeah. I was losing my mind. It was ridiculous. Go watch it on other of our channels. It's crazy. Favorite team to watch right now, hands down.
I was gonna say, in terms, I had I have my imaginary whiteboard where I wrote down what team names you're gonna put down. I was 2 for 2. Dog Walkers was the one I had first for you, just from casting every month of NA with you. Dog Walkers was one of the first ones that came to mind. I talk about it on stream when doing like Masters preview and things like that too. They're so fun to watch. I think Charles is a good story to bring up as well. Somebody that has definitely like shown time and time again that he is very darn good at this game, and unfortunately just hasn't had that breakthrough opportunity. And now finally has teammates that have been with him for extended period of time. Has been super awesome to watch. CMG, like you said, I think a great example of teamwork in the sense that they play all 4 guys as well. Every month it feels like they're rotating in and out. One of the cool changes is that in between sets we've been able to throw guys in and interchange. And I'm not behind the scenes. I don't know if there's certain maps that these guys train for, or there's certain brawlers that each of them are best at and they'll have access to when going in for drafts. But they've been really interesting to watch too. I like how you said elevated the competition, because I think NA East, the expectation this year was that Tribe were probably going to be the favorites coming into it. For example, STMN and the West Side going to be the favorites coming into it. And instead we've gotten really close competitions. We've had 3 different Grand Finals champions in NA East, and we've had 2 in NA West. It's been awesome, and I never would have guessed, and I didn't guess that Dog Walkers would win the first 2. I had STMN. I held down the line. I think I went 3 for 3 in terms of predicting them. So they got the best of me too. They've been super impressive to watch. Teddy, favorite team, any region, favorite players? What's been your favorite?
Well, I have a few different categories, let's say.
Okay.
You look purely at bias. I mean, I'm a Reply Totem fan. I feel like the Joker show has been super fun, very exciting. I think, honestly, that Reply Totem might be our best shot, as a region at qualifying for, not qualifying, sorry, I'll rephrase that. I think that Reply Totem might be our best shot at winning Worlds for EMEA. So that's kind of, my reasoning behind me supporting Reply Totem so much. I think another team that I think is going to be very interesting to watch in the EMEA is going to be Foot Esports, because, I mean, I am biased towards Lena because, I really like Lena and everyone knows that. But he's playing with Semantic, and those guys did not get along at all for years. And now they're playing together and they have the same objective, and I can't wait to see how that actually pans out. And now finally, my final category is just the biggest surprise for me so far this year. I'm 100% joining in with Ready Set on Dog Walkers, because when I first saw and read about the format for BSC this year and the sub-regions, I was really scared that some regions would suffer quite a bit from it. And NA was one I looked at, because I thought immediately, if Tribe is on one side and STMN on the other, well, it's going to be, the 2 teams that win everything, and it's not going to be very fun to watch. And I was completely wrong. And the main reason I was so wrong is because Dog Walkers stepped up, rose to the occasion, and I mean, they just showed everyone how it's done. And I think that they are the reason why that region is so competitive at the moment and so fun to watch. And I'm very grateful for that.
It's a great story because when you know the context, like in the NA scene, it's the people on the East Coast. You have like Stamina Tribe really running the show, and then they play against like the West kids, as people say, and they're like, "Dude, we're just getting pinged after every time. You're getting server. That's why you're winning." And then I think I can make STMN the butt of the joke here. They literally did so well at Masters that they should be feeling pretty good and confident. STMN, you move to the West Coast and you're like, okay, time to win my free region. Oh, wait, we lost the first monthly final. Then we lost the second monthly final. Oh dear, so it's not a free region. Oh crap, we're going to have to back up. We can no longer back up all that smack that we were talking the whole time. So it's been a great spectator sport. It makes me happy to see things are resolved in the end, because it was definitely a very heavy monetary investment for Stamina to completely uproot things in Canada and move things down to Vegas. But there are storylines galore. There's just not a dull moment in North America at the moment. And it's never for like a reason that is all bad in the end. It is like someone is on top this time, but we're not far enough into the season where someone's status or reputation, their, like I said, investment, right? Things have to be propped up with investments and money if you're assigned to a pro team. None of that is being threatened yet. So we are now kind of crossing the line through the midseason from the, okay, this has been really fun to watch, into the, okay, now I'm like biting my nails a little bit because this decides whether we're going to Worlds. It's not just entertainment. It's not just fame and glory. It's also someone's job.
Yeah, I think storylines is a good point too, and I think Dogwalkers, Totem, all the ones that you mentioned, even Foot. I'm really excited to see what Foot can do in the second half. I think for people that maybe you just watch the monthly finals and they tune in next month, they're not necessarily following things on Twitter or behind the scenes. I think you make a good point. The chemistry is something that I think a lot of people will question for Foot. No doubt they are two very talented players. Drage obviously being with them too. Look, they have the ceiling, I think, to absolutely make a run at LCQ. That's a team that I always find really exciting to watch too. It's somebody that's been growing these past, few months as well. Now they shake things up a little bit, which, happens a lot for teams. It's not something super uncommon. The first half, it's like, all right, no, we can't play games anymore. It's like, we have to get this perfect the rest of the way. And I think that's a great point that you make too, Reddy, is even for somebody like Tribe Gaming, we'll take them as an example. In a East, 3 different Grand Finals champions. Tribe have made all 3 and have won 1 of 3. That's the level of competition that we've got going on right now. And Dogwalkers, of course, have made that interesting too. STMN, they even had it on interview. I believe it was Ethot with them last month that we casted in A, and they said, no doubt we moved over here thinking that this would be a good opportunity for us, a really good way to earn like a world final spot. And it has not been as easy as we thought it would be. And he admitted that. Bobby said it on interview, and I kind of chuckled in the background because I would have thought the same thing too. As much credit as I give NA for being competitive, it's STMN and Tribe. And I think those are household names that have been going on for multiple years. We've seen Bobby and OG and the boys all go at it. We've seen Tribe and the same crew now do this for multiple years. And the fact that we're getting 2 very interesting regions has made it an awesome thing to watch at home. So as a fan, I'm eating it up. If I'm these players, I'm nervous. I'm feeling the emotions. But as professional opinion havers, we just get to enjoy all the chaos and the fun. Trav, favorite team or player?
Well, I mean, to kind of add to the previous point, I think Foot's going to be an interesting one for the second half of the season. A little bit of an underwhelming first half of the season, but, if Semantic and Linane can put their issues aside and really work together to make this team work to the best of its abilities, it's going to be a force to be reckoned with. Because if you can put all that aside and let the maturity shine through, their mechanics are good enough to take down anybody in the region, let's put it that way. I think other than that, NABSC is a little bit past my bedtime, so just looking at SPS specifically, STMN have been probably my favorite team to watch this year. Just seeing Bobby run it down, seeing Sans run it down with some of these tanks, Sam straight down some of those lanes, the aggressiveness that they bring to the table, it's just so exciting to watch.
Yeah, they call it or at least I think we've kind of coined it as just like the W key meta. I think I said it in an interview too, but this very aggressive meta that we've got going on right now in Brawl Stars has really led to very different play styles. And I think STMN were one of the first to kind of adapt to that. I think Dogwalkers are a great example of that too. We've now seen them, whether it's ESL or BSC monthly finals, I've seen them 2 times now pull out Mortis on a shooting star map. Like, it's unbelievable what these teams are doing and how they're innovating and adapting to things. Like we had indestructible walls come up. We haven't even talked about that. There's been some crazy meta changes in Brawl Stars come around, which we'll absolutely get to. But I think STMN is somebody for me as well that have been very enjoyable to watch. I even had the opportunity. OG was nice enough to let me interview him on my stream one time, and he was like, we've got 4 great players, and right now, we feel like that the 3 players that are playing are the best for this current meta. I'm still around. I'm still helping with draft. At Masters, you could see him still on the podium helping out with things like that. So I think it's really cool that they're taking a very team-centric approach to, they're doing what they feel is best for them. And again, the meta is so different than it was like a year ago. It's not the same backyard bull, for example, it used to. I feel like we're not nearly as just everybody stand back and do the thing. Maybe on backyard bull, but You know what I mean? It's not nearly the let's just sit back, play it safe kind of meta. Like there are people going nuts with all of these tanks right now, and tanks is something I comes to mind for this meta. And I think for that reason, it's probably talked about in EMEA because at least I notice it. I don't know if it's as me and Reddy are from NA, so a lot of the pro players from NA get talked about a lot here, at least on like the Twitterverse, but. Angel Boy is nuts with it on the tank, and I just need the world to know that. I have really enjoyed watching Angel Boy play. Obviously with BSC, it hasn't gone Navi's way necessarily as much until later on, but we've had things like ESL and Queso Cups and things like that. Every time I watch that guy, I feel like he's just popping off on the tanks. Like that guy is so much fun to watch, so aggressive, just does that kind of thing that like RBM for my NA folks does. Just causes a ruckus. He gets to the enemy side. He's distracting. He's forcing him to reuse resources. He's popping off, getting kills. So that was one that stood out to me. I think if I ever need just some mechanical masters, Crazy Raccoon for me are still. I mean, it's just crazy what they can do. Storyline for a Choppy, last one that I'll throw out, has been one that's really interesting to me. I've called this kind of a legacy for me kind of year. He's the only one of those like Zeta cores that's gone off on his own, picked up 2 brand new teammates. And I think the second half of the year, that's a storyline that I want to see happen. Because for me, I think there are pro players, I've talked to them, that think that a Choppy might be the best player in the world. Maybe not after Masters and everything, maybe opinions change, things like that. But nonetheless, at least going into Masters, I know at least 2 to 3 pros that have told me, they say, I think a Choppy might be right there with Tensai and Satampo. So I think if he can win this year with a brand new crew, somehow pull off a World Finals win, obviously we didn't get to see Reject at things like Masters, that would be absolutely wild. And I think he would be in that GOAT conversation. I think it would no longer be a mainly 2-sided race. I think it would go for 3. Okay, final thing. We have a very interesting meta, like I alluded to here. We've had things like indestructible walls. We've had some interesting balance changes as well. As some quick bullet points, what is your favorite and maybe something that you'd like to see changed in the balance changes right now? We'll start. We'll go Ready. I think it's been a second.
Yeah, we're gonna need to let this one breathe a little bit too, because the current meta is a lot of things. It's a symptom of like the anti-tank brawlers being nerfed quite a bit, and that lets the meta breathe a little bit. It's also a symptom of draft and just how it's all about getting that final pick in or getting some brawler that is impossible to respond to for your enemy, lining up your bans that way. I can definitely say a brawler that I would like to see nerfed somehow is Janet. Another one is Penny. They seem to be relatively immune to balance changes. Janet, in my opinion, is just like the best all-rounder in the game. And I've some like kind of spicy opinions about the direction that the game is going and some of the brawlers that are being introduced, where I feel like we're waving goodbye to a lot of nicheness, where you have a brawler that's like RT, and so you have tanks and you have sharpshooters, and you also have like support brawlers, and he's literally all 3. You get like a damage boost on opponents for your teammates. You are a tank, you're a sharpshooter all at the same time, and it's like, okay, so he's just good at everything, and he has a gadget that does instant damage, which is just incredibly powerful. And I think Janet also falls into that department. She has a wide, long-range shot. She has a piercing shot. She has a gadget that is extremely oppressive. And I think we ought to see some kind of change for Janet, because she's just too good at doing everything. And Penny is another one. She's great versus tanks, but she's also a sharpshooter, and also she has a spawnable, which is a turret, and then you need to have some kind of anti-turret to deal with it. And even if you do, she's still good. So you have these brawlers that run the meta at the moment just because they're good at so many different things. And just something that I've noticed is that we've seen brawlers that can do everything happening lately, and also seeing kind of like some of the in-game descriptors. We used to have like stealthy assassin and toxic assassin, and now it's just like tank, damage dealer, support. That's it. Those are the 3 distinctions. And I think Brawl Stars, with a cast of almost 67 characters now, does have nicheness to it that absolutely has to be preserved. You shouldn't have characters that are able to like suddenly counter all of their counters. There needs to be counterplay, and there needs to be counterpicking that preserves the strategy that exists within drafting and exists within selecting your brawler and also playing your brawler. Those are my hot takes. As far as brawlers that I also think we need to see addressed, Shelly, I think, has just gotten too much of a buff. There was already a deadly combo with her before. You super with Shell Shock, and then you hit your gadget, and then you spam auto aim, and it's like, okay, cool. You win for like the rest of the game. And it's very oppressive at the moment. And I know that the approach that the devs like to take is let's look at win rates, and it can be quite dangerous to balance a game just for the competitive players because, look, dude, we have the 99.999% of people who are playing the game that are not playing on a competitive level. However, I would like to see this game balanced around competitive play, at least like a little bit, like acknowledge that it exists a little bit, please.
Interesting. I didn't expect us to take that route, but that is something I haven't really thought of in a little bit. And I think a valid point and something they alluded to on their podcast as well is, I think one of the questions was roughly, how do you preserve like having so many brawlers and also unique brawlers? Because, every season we're releasing, 1 to 2 brawlers every, within that 60, 70-day period. So I think that is a fair point. And I'm sure something that they're going to have to think about too, because at some point in the game, we're going to have, 100 brawlers, which is kind of insane to think about, but we're approaching 70 as it is right now. And, it's not too outlandish to say in a few years from now, we're going to be at 100. And, how are we going to kind of make competitive players happy in the sense of everybody kind of has like there's enough strategy to keep things unique, that not every draft is the same, that there's not a one size fits all for every draft on every map. You definitely want unique ways to kind of go about that. I feel like this year as a whole has been pretty solid in that aspect. I feel like for me personally, when watching, I think it's been, obviously the players are going to have a very different take. The casual fans at home, we're kind of in that weird in between, right, where we're watching and keeping up with Brawl Esports very highly, and maybe casual players are just tuning in for monthly finals. But yeah, we're kind of in that in between, and for me, I feel like it's been pretty solid overall. I think Janet was a good point, and I think just the concept in general is there are several brawlers that are not, I don't want to call them overpowered by any means, but they're really, really good in almost every circumstance. I call them the safe picks on broadcasts, as we kind of all coined it as, but Penny's another good one that recently got like an HP nerf. I'm curious to see how much that really carries over. But yeah, I think Shelly is really strong too. I don't know how I feel about that, because my heart's like, oh my God, we get to see Shelly. Like, this is incredible. And there's some crazy plays that can happen, but she's pretty darn strong, Teddy.
Yeah, Shelly is incredibly strong. Myself, like looking at the meta, if I have some wishes to make, I think first of all, something that comes up a lot is how hard the game is to balance, right? Because you have people that are somewhat beginners or just casual to the game, and the brawlers that are going to be strong to them are going to be super different than the brawlers that dominate in competitive. In competitive, brawlers are going to dominate because they have incredibly high skill ceilings or because they offer a lot of team utility. And those are factors that are really hard to balance around the entirety of the game and at every level. And I kind of wish that there was a bit of a rework maybe on some star powers and gadgets, because some of them are just very redundant at the moment. And it's like there's one that is good and one that, is not. And I would like to maybe see some more team utility or some more mechanical concepts coming in, whether it's for our existing brawlers or new brawlers, that like kind of push the limits a little bit more, so we have a bit less of a still competitive meta. I don't think the competitive meta has been still, don't get me wrong, but there are some brawlers like B as well that I think wasn't mentioned yet, that we've been seeing so much for so long, and Janet is a fantastic shot as well. Max too, my only problem with Max is that it's so fun to watch, and so you kind of want Max to be meta. It makes it more dynamic, more aggressive. But maybe if there were other ways to get that sort of team utility that the max speed offers, or roughs as well, which is like, those are all brawlers that don't really dominate at a lower level, but at high level, they're just so good because either they're very mechanical or they offer a lot of team utility. And I want to see some more of that coming into new brawlers, or maybe a couple reworks here and there, because as you said, there's going to be 70 brawlers soon enough, and I feel like some of them could use some tweaks here and there to just offer a little bit more variety at a competitive level.
I think that was actually a really good point to make too, and something that's good to distinguish, because I feel like when I'm talking about brawlers on like either whether it's my own personal streams or after the fact I'll see somebody in chat have a very different opinion on certain brawlers. I think a good example, a couple that come to mind for me, M's solid brawler, but when you're like 10,000 trophies in, it's like you're fighting demons. Like, it is the craziest thing you've ever seen. She's like, area control brawlers go nuts. Tick at an early level messes with people. Bow mines. Diamond players go crazy for, and I'm victim to that because I'm in PL, so I know that for a fact. People hate bow mines. And there's things like that like pro players are like, it's just another brawler. Like, there's things like that. So I think making a very good distinction between, kind of these pro player brawlers and balancing between casual players, because I think that's something that you both kind of pointed at too. And I think it was the very first question on the other podcast as well. Our good friend Ark asked about nerfing Mortis, and they were like, no, like Mortis is not like running rampant and competitive. They were basically very blunt with it. They were just like, it's a very good casual brawler. There's a lot of fun. I definitely think that's one of those brawlers where it's very circumstantial, kind of has his own role in competitive too. So for me, I kind of understood where they were coming from, but I really liked what you said. I think having more specific and designated team players, Colonel Ruffs is always one of the most interesting ones to me. Just because of how many different combinations of like utility that he can bring to the table. He's either powering up teammates with the super, or he even has a lot of it's researched a little bit too in player aid. But on KO and in Bounty, it's coming back where they'll pair him with like a Tick or a Sprout or name your favorite thrower or Gene, somebody, for example, and they'll all group together just like it felt like in 2021, where he's like taking his star power and powering it up with extra HP. He's got the sandbags, he's got the rocket rain. Like, I love Colonel Ruffs, one, because of his character, but two, for that reason too. I think it's a good competitive brawler because he's definitely not overpowered in personal opinion, but he also is very unique, and I think still serves as kind of that safe first pick, if you will. Like, there's not a ton of counterplay into him, especially depending on bans and things like that. So I really, really enjoyed that answer. Trav, any wish list or things that you enjoy about the current meta? Would you do away with anything? World's your oyster, Trav. What are you doing?
Yeah. Right. Listen, first off, scrap draft. Tammy Bets 2021, 2020. We bring in a Gene, Max, and Sandy combo.
No, cut that.
And we roll with that. Absolutely perfect meta. Take me back to those days. Brilliant comp. But, at the moment, I think, if we are keeping draft, which technically I do think we should, get rid of Shelly. Absolutely broken at the moment. Stupid brawler. Absolutely rapid with a super that slows them down. Slap a gadget on, get some range going as well. Ridiculous. On top of that, I kind of do agree with what Teddy said. Bees ran under the radar for so long. Really good brawler. And like, at the end of the day, get rid of that in my eyes, because it's making Max stronger, and I love seeing Max as well. But on top of that, I kind of think all the points that you guys have made, with the Ruffs being an extremely good competitive brawler, I love seeing Ruffs all day long. And with what you said about, I wish the meta was more team orientated rather than kind of just really strong brawlers making a breakthrough. And yes, even with 6 bans, we still see a lot of them just show up. And, I don't despise the meta at the moment. If we take Shelly out of the mix, I think it's fine. But, same with the Penny and the Janet as well. I always say Janet, she's just way too versatile, good against pretty much everything, and not really a lot that counters her. And I feel like there's, just a few of those mentions that could go maybe a little bit down a peg.
Yeah, I think fair too. I go back and forth. It's hard too, because I think, when balancing the game, especially Teddy brought it up too, but it's really hard to balance for casual players and competitive, because Shelly is somebody that, like, as a fan, I love watching. Like, I don't think the people at home are ever like, darn it, like, I hate it when the Shelly blasted through all the enemies. But if you're one of those pro players, tough situation, right? I think one of the hardest ones for me that comes to mind in terms of balancing, Max, for sure. I think Max is somebody that's been around for a long time. It is kind of that brawler that brings a lot to the table, is kind of that team player with the energy drink that she provides, speeds up all the brawlers. I feel like pro players are going to be pretty split on if they would want that to be a buff or a nerf. And I think right now there'd be more pro players that want a nerf. But if you're, one of those casual fans, it's like, vroom vroom, I get to go really fast, so it's always so tough for me. And I feel like there's always things, even for myself, like personally, everybody who watches knows this, but I'm very adamant about being a Gale fan. That is my favorite brawler. But when Gale was really good, he was way too good. And there's some brawlers out there that I think people may not realize, but if they're given like even an inch, they'll take it a mile. And Gale was certainly one of those brawlers, especially in a very tank-centric meta at the time where, I think the stun even at one point, it may have been 1.5 seconds. They brought it down to 1 maybe. Whatever the math was there, it was a very long, like 1 second goes a long way at a pro level. Like for somebody like me pushing the Gale, just trying to get the mastery, might not be as easy to pull off those plays and make that count, but they will eat up every 0.5 seconds that they can get. So I think it is kind of a little bit of a balancing act there in terms of what you want to accomplish and things like that. But yeah, Max, somebody that came to mind for me is kind of a interesting one. Shelly was the first one I wrote down when I was thinking about it too. I was jotting some notes while you were talking, and Shelly absolutely the first one that came to mind though. So I think it's hard. I think they've picked a few good ones recently to kind of balance change too. I think Meg, Amber, a couple ones that they backtracked on a little bit. Even Penny and B got a little bit of an HP nerf, but yeah, I'm kind of with y'all. It is it's a tough spot. They have a tough job. We just get to talk about it. So I'm glad we don't necessarily have to deal with all that. But nonetheless, this has been super fun. I think this was what I'll call a success, fellas. Happy episode 1. Very excited for the second half of the BSC year. So thank you all for listening in for the first episode of the Protesto Podcast. Let us know what you guys think in the comments down below. We'd love to hear, future thoughts and questions maybe that you all have or would like to see us talk about. And I'm sure as the BSC progresses too, we'll have plenty of talking points with the competition. But with that being said, keep rolling, fellas.